Hello YouTube and welcome back to part 3 of what downtown Portland looks like in 2021. In this episode I will take you on to the freeways around Portland to take a look at the homeless and trash problems that has built onto the freeways around Portland. And if you have not watched part 1 and part 2, I strongly recommend you to take a look at those so you get better context. Those two videos has generated almost 500,000 views and 95% positive ratings. And for the upcoming part 4, I will take you on a cruise on the Willamette River around downtown Portland to take a look at the homeless problems and trash has also spilled onto the waterways of Portland. So now, without further ado, let's get started with part 3. Now, it has been more than 3 months since part 2 was released. I just want to give a little more time to see if things get better in Portland on the streets. So let's do a little quick review of what kind of things has happened in Portland, particularly in downtown or around downtown in the last 3 months. And boy, do I have a list for you. Let's go back to February 27th, the Saturdays that I just finished filming in downtown's nearby Pearl District. That same evening, a group of protesters has descended onto the commercial areas of the district, dressed in black clothing and black masks, some with tactical helmets and green laser pointers, marching and chanting. Along the ways, windows were smashed, rocks were flying, graffitis was painted, under-resourced and over-deployed, and having to deal with multiple shootings across Portland that same evening. Portland police was only able to send out a handful of officers on bicycles to follow and observe the crowd, and by the end of the night, only one arrest was made, leaving business owners waking up to destructions and losses that they once again have to deal with. It is still unclear that how exactly doing all these destructions will actually help and advance the things that these protesters were advocating, whatever that will be. Now here I would like to stop and address one thing. From my part 2 video, a lot of comments made by viewers that these people are not protesters, they are rioters, criminals, or Antifa. As much as I would like to agree with that, I would still want to sort of stay away from doing so because of this thing called YouTube community guidelines. And also, according to Joe Biden, Antifa is just an idea, not people. So I'm just gonna stick with the mainstream media's narrative just to be safe, that maybe I will just call these people mostly peaceful protesters. How about that, huh? So that way, my channel will not be at risk of being deplatformed or demonetized. So just want to play safe here. So let's digress. Do you still remember the federal courthouse in downtown Portland? You know, the one with the fence built around it during the summer protests of 2020, shown here in my part 1 video. On March 9th, the city has announced the removal of the fence, and the process started on March 10th, and the fence came down on March 11th. That same day, just when people of Portland started to breathe a sigh of relief, a large crowd once again descended to downtown Portland and started their mostly peaceful protests. Now I'm talking about the usual activities such as breaking windows, setting buildings to fire, which prompted the federal agents once again came out of the courthouse in full military gear, deploying tear gases, stun grenades, beanbags, and all that usual methods that was used in the summer protests of 2020. After the smoke was clear, the fire put out. Federal courthouse once again sustained damage, and because it's a mostly peaceful protest, of course, surrounding areas, business, and buildings also sustained damage, like windows broken, graffitis painted. So on March 14th, just 72 hours after the fence was taken down, it was put back up again, and the celebration was short-lived. On April 17th, there was an incident in Portland involving the shooting death of a man by the Portland police for circumstances that were still under investigation. As expected, mostly peaceful protesters descended into downtown Portland that same evening and started their protests, setting fire to the Apple store and smashed businesses in the area. Besides the Apple store, the Nike store, one of the biggest retailer in downtown Portland, was broken into and have its merchandise removed from the premises peacefully. Shortly after the pyrotechnicians and free merchandise samplers has left the chaotic scene, Portland police showed up just in time to stand guard as firefighters put out the fires. Now it's unclear why Apple and Nike became the target for this particular mostly peaceful protest. On April 23rd, the day that Derek Chauvin was found guilty of murder by the court, more protests happened in Portland. And yes, mostly peaceful ones, of course. The protesters marched on the streets of Northwest Portland near downtown. They started smashing windows, painting graffitis to the usual business such as Starbucks. But this time, restaurants, a barbershop, and grocery stores also sustained damage, and the local Blazers Boys and Girls Club also did not escape the carnage. And 1 month later, on May 25th, the 1 year anniversary of George Floyd's death, well, you got it, more protests, and mostly peaceful ones, but this time adding fires and fireworks, with rockets red glare, fireworks bursting in air. City Hall was smashed, doors was kicked in, and nearby businesses, of course, sustained damage. Restaurants, bars, jewelry shops, you name it. The usual situation, the usual story. As for the Portland police, remember that building that was boarded up? The past year has nothing but a challenge for them. Since the summer of 2020, budgets and fundings were reduced and redirected. The gun violence team, which is designed to tackle gang and gun violence, is also dissolved. At the same year, Portland saw a skyrocketed 800% in murders. With 55 homicides in 1 year and victims ranging from 8 months old to 71 years old, leading people to start wondering if this is caused by the defunding and resources being taken away from the local police. Mayor Ted Wheeler promised to bring back patrols to tackle gun violence. While asked if this is the same gun violence team that was eliminated last year, he said no, but it looks similar. Apart from homicides and murder, just general crimes saw a more than 500% increase in 2020, way above the national average among big cities. Local newspaper The Oregonian has reported that internal sources has told the paper that many officers are overworked, overwhelmed, and burned out, and many of them are leaving the force. To make matters worse, in mid-June, a member of the Portland Rapid Response Team, the team that is responsible for crowd control and anti-riots, was indicted for violence against a protester. After the indictment was announced, the entire team, some 50 members strong, has decided to resign. So at this point, Portland has no crowd control unit to respond to any immediate or future, mostly peaceful protests. Well, to be fair, the pandemic and COVID shutdowns is also one of the big contributor to many business and restaurants to go belly up in 2020. Almost 1,200 restaurants went permanently closed in 2020, and in the first quarter of 2021, 81 were already gone. On April 30th, the third COVID shutdown was imposed. Yes, Portland area's restaurants saw not just one, not two, but three shutdowns since the beginning of the pandemic, with the second one being the longest, lasting from November all the way to early February, with restaurant capacity being allowed to reopen to 25%. Now, just less than 2 months a third shutdown was ordered by the governor, and this time there was a lot of resistance, and many county commissioners wrote letters to the governor asking that she should reverse the shutdown. With a lot of resistance and criticism from the local leaders and the business communities, the third shutdown has proven to be a real doozy for the governor and has cost her dearly politically. And as a result of that, this third shutdown lasted only 7 days. A 7-day shutdown. Isn't that the shortest shutdown ever? And it was cited that that's because of a 0.1% difference in calculations. And with that 1% calculation corrected it, Portland was reopened after 7 days, just in time for Mother's Day's weekend. Today, fast forward to June 30th. Portland and Oregon is now 100% reopened for business. No more COVID restrictions. So the question is, will downtown Portland return to its previous glory and prosperities, or will business return or just stay away for good? And more importantly, do you think that before the business community will have confidence again to invest their money in downtown Portland, that they might want to see some sort of commitment from the local leaders that they're committed to protect business and residents and hold people accountable for the criminal activities, as well as providing the police with resources, tools, and political support to do their job. After all, who wants to spend their lifetime savings to invest in a restaurant or business in downtown Portland only to have tents and camps line up their front door? Or every time there is a police incident anywhere in the nation or locally, that a protest will spun up at any given time with graffitis painted on their walls and rocks flying through the windows, or even worse, fire burning at the front door. And for the customer and the employees as well, who wants to work in downtown Portland or visit downtown Portland knowing that it's not safe, that a rock could fly through a window when they're trying to enjoy a cup of coffee, or when they're trying to work like this bartender, that window is broken but he still have to clean up the mess. Or some business might just decide to leave for good and move to a state that is less prone to government mandates, restrictions, and back and forth shutdowns. States like Texas, Florida, just to name a few. Okay, so that was all I have for updates on downtown Portland since the last video, part 2. Now for part 3, let's buckle up, start the engine, and get on the freeway and take a look at what things are like on the freeway around Portland. Let's go. In some of the comments from viewers in my second video, there are people saying that the areas that I was showing are just localized in a few blocks in downtown Portland, and the rest of Portland has no homeless issue. Now the truth is really far from that. What I was showing in downtown Portland was actually the tip of the iceberg. Now let me show you what the rest of the iceberg looks like. A local news agency has recently published a map of distribution of homeless camps in the Portland area. And you can see right there, the blue circle, that is downtown Portland. And as we zoom out, you can see how big the iceberg really is. I believe the black dot stands for tent sites and the red dot stands for RV sites. And of course, you can see some of the sites will have tents and RVs co-mingled together to form some sort of combined encampment. In this video, I would like to focus on the 5-mile stretch of Interstate 5 freeway, starting from downtown Portland to the north, the Columbia River that borders the state of Washington, highlighted in the blue lines here. This is the stretch of freeway that I have chosen because this freeway is where what most travelers will see when they pass by Portland without going into downtown. And also, this is the stretch of freeway that I've been traveling and commuting for the last 15 years. going back and forth from Portland to Vancouver. So I have seen it all the changes yearly, monthly, weekly, and sometimes daily. So the following videos that you are about to see are the videos that I've taken in different times over the last 6 months, just to show you what I see through my eyes. For the record, I'm not an investigative journalist or a professional reporter by any means. I'm just a regular Joe that has lived in the Portland area for the last 30 years, not trying to stage a smear campaign against the city or try to vilify homelessness. But I do want to show people that are not familiar with the area how Portland has really changed, not just in the last 30 years, but even for the last year. This is getting really ridiculous, and I felt like I have to do something about it. And the only way I can do something about it is to pull out my phone and start filming what I see every day. As you can see, the homeless camps and the trash has turned the freeways and the surrounding areas into something resembling of a landfill. Now, I have been to some third world countries and developing worlds where a highway will literally has landfills lying alongside of it. Unlike those landfills, there are people living here in this kind of trash environment where health hazard and material hazard is a real concern. Not only that, a lot of the garbage, trash, shopping carts spill out to the freeway, also causing hazardous conditions for the motorists as well. Remember I mentioned that I drive through this area all the time? I've seen good days, bad days, and some days when things are literally gone up in flames, like this place here. This is a perfectly good day, a little trash, but no big deal. But someday you drive by and you see a plume of black smoke, and you see the whole camp went up in flames, and there are cars driving by where fire trucks rush to put out a fire right along the freeways. So this is the kind of hazardous environment that I was talking about, where not only it is a health concern and hazard concern for the people that are living in those tents, but also for the motorists that are driving by as well. Just to remind you that this is just 5 miles of freeway stretched from downtown Portland to the border between Oregon and Washington. There are many other places with campsites, tents, trash like this all over other parts of Portland areas along the freeways. So while this reminds you of a third world developing countries, this is America, right? We're supposed to have elected local governments and officials that are supposed to be committed to solving the problem for the people. So now the question for the people of Portland is that, do they want to see this as the future of their city? Is this something that they will get used to? Or do they want something to change? Now, does the local government have other pressing priority that they have to resolve? And will this be resolved in the future time? So all these are open questions that local government and local residents must ask themselves and each other, whether if this is going to be the future of Portland. In the last 6 months, the observations that I have made through everyday driving through the areas, I have noticed that things has not gone better, but worse. For example, take a look at this campsite. This is the RVs and tents about a few months ago. See how it extended into some nice neighborhoods? Now, 1 month after I took that video, I returned to the same area, and let's look at the camps and tents situations. As you can see, there are more RVs, more tents, and more semi-permanent structures erected right alongside. And by the way, that's Mount St. Helens in the background with some really nice views. And as you can see, this kind of a semi-permanent campsite is now somewhat a permanent thing that local residents in this neighborhood will have to contend with. And this is the new reality of Portland. Will it be the new future of Portland? People question whether if I'm qualified to talk about Portland's issues. Well, I'm not really sure what their definition of qualifications are. All I know is that having grown up and lived in the Portland area for the last 30 years, being a teenager in the late 80s and early 90s has left me fond memories of the city. It's a city where an Asian immigrant kid like me can call home. It's a city where we look upon the LA riots in the early 90s and be thankful that this is Portland and not LA. I went to Cleveland High School and graduated from Portland State University. But boy, has Portland changed in the last 30 years. Portland was a good place before it became a cool place. All right, so my qualification is really not important of a topic. Let's move on. Now, one might ask, is the local government doing anything about homeless problem in the area? Well, they are. Now, the Oregon Senate just introduced a House Bill 2367 earlier this year. It's called the Right to Rest Act. Will keep the city from penalizing people for sleeping on public properties. And in June, Oregon lawmaker passed a bill that will protect homelessness from being arrested or fined for camping in public lands and public properties. So things are being done for the problem. And also, last year, there's a measure that was passed by the local government in the Portland area that will place a 1% tax on wealthy individuals and business to provide fundings for homeless problems relief and programs that will help to alleviate the city for providing more resources to tackle the homeless issues. But then you might ask, how is the local government going to be spending all that extra money to help with the issue? Well, let me take you to a road trip to the southeast neighborhood and see how some of the money is being spent. Like, for example, that red toilet right there. Yes, I'm not kidding. Some of the money will go to a public restroom facility like that red toilet that we're looking at to kind of alleviate some of the health concerns for public urinations and public defecations. Now see, this is another red porta potties being put up on the neighborhood next to a lot of the homeless sites on the streets. And a lot of the money will also be used to create additional and extra housing units and shelters for the homeless population. For example, this used to be a travel lodge on Southeast Powell near 82nd Avenue. And now, so this hotel or motel has been converted into a shelter. And also, additional funding has been provided to construct additional structures alongside of the existing hotel or motel to provide additional rooms and units and space for the ever increasing demands from the homeless populations. And the thing is that whenever this type of conversion happens, the same sort of issue will be brought to the adjacent neighborhood, such as this, that trash, camps, and tents and RVs will show up right alongside, and just the sort of the usual situation where local residents will have to just deal with and mitigate. So there's really no way around it, just because how things are. Here, I would like to go back to that question about my qualification to talk about Portland. Now, this is actually my childhood neighborhood. I grew up here. I used to live here. I don't live here anymore. But guess what? My parents do. My folks, their house just 6 blocks from this unit. And for them, they're too old to move. They don't want to move. This is their home. They like to live here because the community is here, the Asian community. Did they ask for this? No, they did not. All they want, like many people that are long-term resident of Portland, all they want is that Portland go back to just being good.